The words were a blade, honed to a perfect, cruel edge. "Don't speak to me," he said, and the warmth of the past year turned to frost. My husband, Duke Alaric of Blackwood, stood in the doorway of our private drawing room, his face a mask of cold fury I had not seen since before he was my husband at all. His eyes, the color of a winter storm, were fixed on me, but they did not see me. They saw a betrayal, a specter conjured from some haunted corner of his own mind. I knew instantly what he had witnessed. Professor Albright, a man thrice my age with spectacles perched on his nose, pressing a grateful dusty kiss to my hand in the hall a moment before. It was a gesture of academic fellowship, of thanks for the funding I had secured for his research into pre-Gothic buttresses. To Alaric, it was something else entirely. A year. We had been married for 1 year, a year that had been a slow, miraculous thaw after a lifetime of ice. I had come to believe that the woman I was, the quiet, overlooked creature who lived in the shadows of her own home, had vanished forever. I thought I was now Alara, Duchess of Blackwood, a woman seen, a woman valued, a woman loved. But in that moment, as his words hung in the air like frozen shards, I was thrown back into the darkness. I was a girl, hidden behind a potted palm again, a worthless commodity, a ghost in my own life. The terror of that old invisibility was a physical thing, a cold hand closing around my throat. My happiness felt like a gown of spun glass, and he had just brought down a hammer. I had to remember. I had to trace the path from that darkness to this precipice, to understand how the man who had single-handedly taught me I was worthy of being seen could suddenly choose not to see me at all. My memory fled back, past the wedding, past the proposal, past the quiet courtship of minds, all the way back to the beginning. To the night of the grand ball, the night I met the formidable Duke, the night my life truly began. It had started, as most of my miseries did, with the voice of my stepmother, Lady Anya. "No, not the blue silk, Alara. It has a sheen. We cannot have you distracting from Rosamond." Her words were always delivered with a saccharine smile that never reached her eyes. In her world, I was a creature of shadow, and my purpose was to provide a stark, drab background against which her own daughter, my stepsister Rosamond, could shine. Rosamond was a vision of conventional beauty, all golden curls, sparkling blue eyes, and effortless charm. She was not cruel, not actively. Her crime was a profound, unthinking obliviousness, a placid acceptance of the world as her mother presented it, with Rosamond at its sun-drenched center and me in the perpetual eclipse. My father, a man who had long ago traded his spine for a quiet life, merely sighed into his newspaper. His acquiescence was a constant, dull ache in my heart, a deeper wound than even Anya's sharpest barbs. He had loved my mother once, but her memory, like her daughter, had become an inconvenience to him. So I was put in the gray muslin. It was a dress the color of dishwater, with a cut that seemed designed to erase any hint of a woman's shape. It hung on me like a shroud. As we prepared to leave for Blackwood Manor for the most anticipated ball of the season, Anya gave her final instructions. "You will, of course, enjoy the festivities," she said, her voice dripping with false magnanimity, "but from a discreet position, the west alcove, perhaps, behind the large fern. We wouldn't want your particular brand of gloom to wilt the decor." Rosamond giggled, a light, airy sound. My father cleared his throat and studied the tips of his shoes. I said nothing. My silence was a fortress I had built brick by brick over the years, and inside its walls, I was safe. Inside, I could retreat to my true passions, the study of ancient architecture, the mysteries of load-bearing walls and vaulted ceilings, the silent stories told by stone. In my mind, I could reconstruct the flying buttresses of forgotten cathedrals, while the world outside dismissed me as a simple, plain girl. Blackwood Manor was a masterpiece of Gothic revival, a formidable symphony of stone and shadow. It was as imposing and unapproachable as its master, Duke Alaric, a man spoken of in whispers. He was impossibly wealthy, ruthlessly powerful, and notoriously reclusive. He had not hosted a ball in a decade, not since the tragic death of his younger brother, and his sudden decision to open his doors had sent the entire social stratum into a frenzy. For Anya, it was the ultimate arena for Rosamond to secure a brilliant match. For me, it was simply a more ornate cage. True to her word, my stepmother deposited me in the designated alcove. The potted fern was monstrous, its fronds casting dappled shadows that further obscured me. From my hiding place, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the manor's magnificent hammer-beam roof. While the orchestra swelled and the dance floor filled with a kaleidoscope of silk and jewels, I was lost in admiration for the intricate joinery above. I traced the lines of the trusses with my eyes, marveling at the genius of their construction. I was so engrossed that I barely registered the sudden hush that fell over the assembly. Then I saw him. Duke Alaric stood at the top of the grand staircase, a severe, unmoving figure clad in stark black. He was taller than I'd imagined, with a face that looked as though it were carved from granite. There was no warmth in it, only a piercing intelligence and a profound, weary stillness. His gaze swept across the glittering throng below, dismissive and discerning. Ladies curtsied, gentlemen bowed their heads. Anya practically vibrated with anticipation, pushing Rosamond slightly forward as if offering a sacrificial lamb. The Duke's eyes passed over her, over everyone, his expression unchanging. And then, his gaze stopped. It moved past the chandeliers, past the dancers, past the pillars, and landed with an unnerving precision on my forgotten corner. On me. My breath caught in my throat. It was impossible. He couldn't see me. I was invisible. But he was looking. He was not looking at the fern, but through the gaps in its leaves directly at me. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not interest, not pity, but a kind of focused curiosity. My heart began a frantic, terrified hammering against my ribs. Anya, following his line of sight, scowled in confusion, unable to comprehend what could possibly hold his attention in that dark corner of the room. The music swelled again, a nervous, expectant hum. And then the Duke began to descend the stairs. The crowd parted before him like the sea before a prophet. Anya straightened Rosamond's gown, her face a mask of triumphant glee. "He is coming for you," she hissed, her voice trembling with excitement. Rosamond blushed, a perfect, rosy hue. Every eye in the ballroom was fixed on the Duke's slow, deliberate progress. He bypassed the Minister of Finance. He ignored the widowed countess with the largest dowry in the county. He walked directly toward the glittering, hopeful figure of my stepsister. Anya's smile was a predatory slash, but he did not stop. He walked past Rosamond as if she were a marble statue, his eyes never leaving my alcove. The collective gasp of the room was a physical force. He stopped directly in front of the fern that served as my prison wall. He stood there for a moment, a towering, intimidating presence. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. I felt smaller than I ever had in my life, a mouse cornered by a hawk. Then he spoke, his voice a low, resonant baritone that cut through the silence. He was not looking at my face or my drab dress. He was looking at the ceiling above my head. "The angel carvings on the hammer beams," he said, his tone conversational, as if we were the only two people in the room. "Do you believe them to be original to the 12th century foundation, or a later, more sentimental addition from the Victorian Restoration?" The world tilted on its axis. The question was so specific, so arcane, so utterly directed at the secret world I inhabited in my own mind that I could barely process it. All I could feel were the hundreds of pairs of eyes boring into my back, the heat of my stepmother's incandescent rage. My throat was dry, my tongue a clumsy weight in my mouth. I swallowed, forcing myself to find my voice, a thing I so rarely used. A later edition, Your Grace," I stammered, my voice a rusty whisper. "The style is too ornate. The original Cistercian builders of the foundation would have favored austerity. The faces of the angels are too cherubic, too human. It betrays a 19th century sensibility." A flicker of something, approval, perhaps, passed across his stern features. He gave a single sharp nod. "I concur." He then extended a gloved hand, not to me, but to the fern. With one decisive movement, he pushed the enormous potted plant aside, fully exposing me to the stunned ballroom. My drab gray dress, my terrified face, all of it laid bare under the light of 1,000 candles. "The air is stagnant in this corner," he said, his gaze finally meeting mine. "You should be somewhere you can breathe." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd as seamlessly as he had emerged. He left behind him a tableau of utter chaos. My stepmother's face was a mottled canvas of fury and humiliation. Rosamond looked utterly bewildered, and I, Alara, the invisible girl, was suddenly, terrifyingly seen. The silence I had cultivated for a lifetime had been shattered by a single impossible question about angels carved in wood. The days that followed were a new kind of hell. Anya's rage was a venomous whispering thing. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. Her disappointment was a physical pressure in every room I entered. I was accused of 1,000 silent crimes, of deliberate sabotage, of impertinence, of making a spectacle of myself and, by extension, the family. "You embarrassed Rosamond," she hissed at me over a breakfast of cold toast, her eyes like chips of flint. "You drew attention to yourself, a thing you were expressly forbidden to do. What game do you think you were playing, Alara?" I had no answer because I didn't know. I was as bewildered as anyone. I retreated further into myself, convinced the Duke's action had been a whim, a fleeting, cruel impulse to disrupt the placid surface of society. I expected nothing more to come of it. I tried to manage the fragile, treacherous seedling of hope that had taken root in my chest, stamping it down before it could grow. Hope was a fool's luxury, and I was no fool. Then the invitation arrived. It was delivered by a footman in the Blackwood livery, the envelope a heavy, creamy cardstock, sealed with a severe black wax emblem. It was addressed to my father, but the note inside, in a sharp, decisive script, requested the pleasure of our company for tea at the manor. It specifically mentioned a desire to show me by name, his collection of architectural folios. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird beating against a cage. It was not a dream. It was real. Anya could not refuse a ducal invitation, but her fury was palpable. She spent 2 days ensuring Rosamond was dressed in the most fashionable, eye-catching Parisian design, a confection of blue lace and ribbons. For me, she chose a brown merino wool, serviceable and drab. It was a clear statement. You may have caught his eye by some fluke, but I will ensure he sees you for the plain, uninteresting creature you truly are. The carriage ride to Blackwood was silent and tense. When we arrived, we were shown not to a drawing room, but to the Duke's library. And it was not a room. It was a cathedral. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling bookshelves soared into a vaulted sunlit space, connected by a delicate wrought-iron spiral staircase. The air smelled of old paper, leather, and beeswax. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. I felt a sense of coming home that I had never once experienced in my father's house. Duke Alaric was standing by the massive stone fireplace, again dressed in black. He greeted my family with a cool, formal politeness, his eyes passing over Rosamond's finery without comment. Then his gaze settled on me. "Miss Vale," he said with that same unnerving directness, "thank you for coming." While a nervous housekeeper served tea to my stepmother and Rosamond, Alaric led me toward a massive oak table where a set of enormous leather-bound books were laid open. "The original plans for the West Wing," he said, his voice losing some of its formal stiffness. "I have been wrestling with a discrepancy in the load-bearing calculations for the turret. I was hoping for a second opinion." It was a pretense, I knew, but a brilliant one. Under the guise of an academic consultation, he had separated me from my keepers. I bent over the intricate hand-drawn schematics, my shyness dissolving in the face of such a fascinating puzzle. I forgot where I was, who was watching. I spoke of shear stress and tensile strength, my fingers tracing the lines on the fragile paper. He listened, truly listened, asking sharp, intelligent questions. It was not a conversation, it was a meeting of minds. After several minutes, I looked up, suddenly remembering myself. Anya was watching us, her teacup frozen halfway to her lips, her expression a thunderous mask of jealousy. I faltered, my words dying in my throat. Alaric noticed the shift immediately. His gaze followed mine to my stepmother, and a flicker of understanding and something harder, like contempt, passed through his eyes. He straightened up, his tone becoming formal once more, but his next words were for me alone. "You are shivering," he said. It was true. The vast room, for all its beauty, was drafty, and my thin wool dress offered little protection. Before I could protest, he signaled to a servant, who appeared moments later with a heavy cashmere wrap the color of deep burgundy. He draped it over my shoulders himself. The wool was impossibly soft, and it carried a faint, clean scent of sandalwood and winter air. It was a simple gesture, an act of practical kindness, but it felt like an investiture. It was a shield. He then turned to a nearby shelf and retrieved a small, unassuming book. "I believe this might interest you," he said, placing it in my hands. It was a rare treatise on the defensive architecture of medieval hill forts, a volume I had only ever read about. A gift. I clutched the book to my chest, my heart aching with a feeling so foreign I could not name it. It was a terrifying mix of gratitude and hope. He had not just seen me, he was showing me that he remembered what he saw. As we left, he said one more thing. "Years ago," he began, his voice low, "at the Royal Antiquarian Society's lecture on the restoration of the old cathedral, a young woman in the back row asked a question about the resonant frequency of the bell tower and its potential effect on the structural integrity of the flying buttresses. A question that even the lead architect hadn't considered. It was a brilliant observation." He paused, his gaze holding mine. "That was you, was it not?" I could only nod, speechless. He had remembered my mind. In a world that had only ever judged my face, my dowry, and my social graces, he had remembered my mind. The hope I had tried so hard to crush began to grow, wild and unstoppable. Our acquaintance unfolded over the next few weeks through a series of carefully orchestrated, socially unimpeachable encounters. He would invite my family for a walk through his formal gardens, only to steer me toward a crumbling folly at the edge of the estate to debate the merits of its Palladian design. He would host a small musical evening, and while Rosamond was encouraged to play the pianoforte, he would find me in the conservatory, asking my opinion on its wrought iron framework. These were our courting rituals, conversations held in the language of architecture and history. With every meeting, the walls of my silence grew thinner, breached by his respect for my intellect. I found myself speaking more, my voice gaining a confidence I never knew it possessed. I was not just answering his questions. I was challenging his assumptions, offering theories of my own. And he, in turn, seemed to savor the exchange, his severe expression often softening with a look of intense concentration as he considered my points. He never offered compliments on my appearance or my demeanor. His validation was of a different, more profound sort. He valued my thoughts. He sought my opinion. He treated me not as a woman to be charmed, but as an intellect to be engaged. For a girl who had been taught her entire life that her only worth lay in a pretty face and a biddable nature, and that I possessed neither, this was a revelation. It was like being given water after a lifetime of thirst. The terror of it all was immense. I lived in a constant state of anxiety, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to realize I was nothing more than the plain, dull creature my stepmother insisted I was. Each night, I would lie awake and tell myself it was a game to him, an intellectual exercise. But each day, in his presence, the sincerity in his dark eyes made the lie impossible to maintain. One crisp autumn afternoon, he took me to see the ruins of the old abbey on the northern edge of his lands. A chaperone trailed a discreet distance behind us, but we were, for all intents and purposes, alone. The air was filled with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The skeletal remains of the abbey rose against a gray sky, beautiful and melancholic. It was here, amidst the ghosts of forgotten masons and silent monks, that he finally spoke of his own ghost. "My brother Leo loved this place," he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. He ran a hand over the cold, moss-covered stone of a fallen archway. He was younger than me by 5 years, full of life. He saw beauty everywhere. I saw duty. He told me about the accident. Leo had been riding, a reckless, joyful gallop across the fields. The horse had stumbled, a fall, a broken neck, instantaneous. Alaric had been in the city on estate business, a meeting he had deemed too important to postpone. "I should have been here," he said, his voice raw with a grief that was still fresh after a decade. I was always telling him to be more careful, to be more serious. I was so busy trying to make him into a copy of myself that I forgot to simply be his brother. The confession hung in the air between us, a stark and painful truth. I saw then that his coldness was not a product of arrogance, but a shield forged in guilt. He had closed himself off from the world, from emotion, because he believed his own dutiful, severe nature had somehow failed the person he loved most. He had built a fortress around his heart, and I, a student of architecture, recognized its design. I did not offer platitudes or empty reassurances. I simply stood beside him in the quiet ruin and shared the weight of his silence. After a long moment, I said softly, "A structure is not weak because it is joyful. The most beautiful arches are the ones that seem to defy gravity, the ones that soar. Your brother was a soaring arch. It is not a flaw in the design to be built for the sky." He turned to look at me, and his face was transformed. The harsh lines had softened, the storm in his eyes had calmed. He looked at me with a raw vulnerability that stole my breath. As we made our way back along the winding path, my foot slipped on a loose, damp stone. I cried out, stumbling forward. In an instant, his hand shot out, his arm circling my waist, pulling me back against him. His strength was absolute, his hold firm and steadying. I was flush against his chest, my hand pressed against the hard muscle of his arm. I could feel the steady beat of his heart, or perhaps it was my own. The world seemed to stop. The chaperone was a distant figure on the path ahead. The air crackled with a tension that had nothing to do with architectural theory. He held me for a beat longer than was strictly necessary, his gaze fixed on my face. I saw a flicker of conflict in his eyes, a battle between his iron control and something else, something wilder. He released me slowly, his hand lingering on my arm. "Be careful," he murmured, his voice rough. But it was no longer a warning about loose stones. It was a warning to myself about the treacherous ground on which my heart now stood. That night, for the first time, I allowed myself to hope without reservation, and I knew, with a certainty that was both thrilling and terrifying, that I was falling in love with him. My stepmother was not a fool. She saw the change in me, the quiet confidence that was beginning to replace my timid deference. She saw the way the Duke's eyes sought me out in a crowded room. She saw her own meticulously laid plans, centered around Rosamond's marriage to the Duke, turning to ash. Her ambition, thwarted, curdled into a malevolent, desperate poison. She could not accept it. The union of the plain, worthless stepdaughter with the most powerful man in the country was an intolerable narrative, a personal affront to her own perceived brilliance as a social strategist. She decided to burn my burgeoning happiness to the ground before it could fully bloom. Her attack was as cunning as it was cruel. She did not confront me or the Duke directly. Instead, she chose a weapon that could not be easily traced back to her, a weapon of whispers and ink. She penned a letter to Duke Alaric, a masterpiece of malicious fiction written in a disguised, looping hand and signed simply, "A concerned friend." I would not see the letter myself until much later, but Alaric would describe its contents to me in chilling detail. It was a carefully constructed tapestry of lies, woven with just enough truth to seem plausible. It painted me as a deeply disturbed and manipulative creature, preying on the Duke's good nature. It claimed I suffered from the same melancholy delusions that had afflicted my mother, suggesting I was mentally unstable, prone to fantastical stories and hysterical attachments. It hinted that my intellectual pursuits were not genuine, but a calculated ploy to mimic his own interests, a desperate attempt to trap him. The most venomous part of the letter was the invention of a secret lover. It fabricated a sordid, clandestine affair between myself and a low-born stable hand, a young man who had worked for our family years ago. It described secret meetings, passionate letters, and a plot between us to use my supposed engagement to the Duke to extort money before eloping. It was designed to strike at the very heart of what Alaric valued: integrity, honesty, and intellect. It portrayed me as a liar, a social climber, and a fool. To lend her accusations weight, Anya threatened to reveal a shameful family secret if the Duke pursued the connection, the secret being the circumstances surrounding my own mother's death. She twisted my mother's profound grief over my father's emotional abandonment into a narrative of inherited madness, a stain that would surely tarnish the proud Blackwood name. The letter was sent. A day passed, then two. I received no word from the Duke. No invitation arrived. An icy dread began to creep into my veins. Anya watched me across the dinner table, her eyes glittering with a triumphant, reptilian coldness. She knew. She had fired her arrow and was now simply waiting for the poison to do its work. The silence from Blackwood Manor was deafening. My fragile hope began to wither. Perhaps he believed her. Perhaps the risk of scandal, the hint of instability, was enough to extinguish his interest. After all, what was I? A plain girl with a strange love for old buildings. He was a duke. The world was full of beautiful, uncomplicated women like Rosamond. My old identity, the worthless, invisible girl, began to reclaim me. The fortress of my silence began to rebuild itself, stone by miserable stone. I had been a fool to hope. I had been a fool to believe that someone, anyone, could ever truly see me. On the third day of silence, I resigned myself to the familiar ache of worthlessness. The dream was over. On the morning of the fourth day, the Blackwood carriage arrived. It was not an invitation that was delivered, but a summons, a formal, non-negotiable request from the Duke for my father, Lady Anya, Rosamond, and myself to attend him in his library at 2 o'clock. The note stated the matter was of the utmost urgency. My blood ran cold. This was it. The public humiliation. He was going to end it, to expose me as the fraud my stepmother's letter had claimed I was. Anya's smile was serene. Her victory was at hand. She dressed with the care of a general preparing for a triumphal parade. I felt numb, a prisoner being led to her own execution. The ride to the manor was the longest of my life. I stared out the window at the passing scenery, my mind a blank slate of despair. We were shown into the library, that vast, beautiful room that had been the site of my awakening. But today, it felt like an inquisitor's chamber. Duke Alaric was not standing by the fire. He was seated behind his enormous mahogany desk, a formidable judicial presence. The air was thick with tension. He did not rise when we entered. He simply watched us, his face an unreadable mask of granite. He gestured to the 4 chairs arranged before his desk. We sat. The silence stretched, taut and agonizing. I kept my eyes fixed on my hands, twisting in my lap. I could not bear to look at him. Finally, he spoke, his voice devoid of all warmth. Lady Anya. He slid a single sheet of paper across the polished surface of the desk. The anonymous letter. I received this 3 days ago. I believe you are familiar with its contents. Anya feigned a gasp of surprise, her hand flying to her chest. Your Grace, what is this? I'm shocked, utterly shocked, she exclaimed, her voice a perfect imitation of concern. Slanderous lies about my dear troubled Alara. Who could be so cruel? Alaric's expression did not change. Indeed, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Who could be so cruel? I spent the past 72 hours endeavoring to answer that very question. He opened a lacquered box on his desk and began to lay out a series of documents, arranging them with methodical precision. My investigation was thorough. First, the stable hand you mentioned, a Mr. Finch. It took my men less than a day to locate him. He's now a blacksmith in a northern parish, happily married with 3 children. He was quite surprised to hear of his passionate secret affair with Miss Vale, given that he left your family's employ when she was 11 years old. A faint gasp escaped Rosamond. My father shifted uncomfortably. Anya's face paled slightly, but her composure held. Next, the Duke continued, his voice relentless, the matter of Miss Vale's supposed inherited instability. He placed another document on the desk. This is a sworn affidavit from Dr. Albright, who attended Alara's mother in her final years. He states quite clearly that she suffered not from madness, but from a profound and understandable melancholy brought on by her husband's neglect. He glanced at my father, a look of such withering contempt that my father physically flinched. Furthermore, he testifies to Miss Vale's own character, describing her as possessing a uniquely resilient and lucid mind. He then produced another set of papers, financial ledgers. And finally, the most interesting discovery, the matter of the dowry left to Miss Vale by her mother, a considerable sum which was to be held in trust by Lord Vale, a trust from which funds have been systematically withdrawn by you, Lady Anya, for the past decade, to pay for Rosamond's gowns, tutors, and seasons in the city. The mask of my stepmother's composure finally shattered. Her face contorted into an ugly snarl of disbelief and rage. "Lies," she hissed. "All of it. Lies. Forgeries." "Are they?" Alaric's voice was like chipping ice. "My solicitors are prepared to prove their authenticity in a court of law. Theft is such an unpleasant charge. It would utterly ruin your daughter's marital prospects." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. "You sought to destroy an innocent woman's reputation. You slandered the memory of the dead. You stole from a child you were meant to protect. You did all of this because you could not bear to see a woman of substance valued over a woman of mere ornament." He turned his gaze to me then, and for the first time I saw the cold fury in his eyes was not directed at me, but for me. It was the righteous anger of a protector. Empowered by that look, by the irrefutable truth laid bare on the desk, a lifetime of suppressed pain and anger found its voice. I stood up, my legs trembling but holding. I looked directly at the woman who had tried to erase me. "You were wrong," I said, my voice clear and steady, echoing in the silent room. My silence was not weakness, it was patience. I was waiting. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but it was for this moment, a moment when the truth would have a louder voice than your lies. I looked at her, at the hollow ambition in her eyes. "You tried to make me invisible because you were afraid. You were afraid that if anyone ever truly looked at me, they would see you for what you are. Empty. A house with beautiful curtains and no foundation. And he," I said, turning my gaze to Alaric, "is a master builder. He saw the truth of your foundations at a single glance." Anya stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had no words left. She was utterly defeated. My father buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with pathetic, belated sobs of remorse. Rosamond, to her credit, was weeping openly, but her eyes were fixed on me, filled with a horrified, dawning understanding and a profound shame. "Alara," she whispered, "I am so sorry." The war was over. I had not just survived. I had won. Alaric dismissed them with a cold, final wave of his hand. "You will restore every last penny of Alara's inheritance," he commanded my father, "and then you will remove yourselves from my sight." They scurried out of the room like chastened dogs, a broken, ruined family. I was left alone with him in the quiet, sun-drenched library. I was shaking, drained but incandescently, terrifyingly free. The weight of years of emotional servitude had been lifted. I felt light enough to float. He rose from his desk and came to stand before me. He looked down at me, his stern face softened by an emotion I could not yet dare to name. "Alara," he said, his voice now gentle, "I did not do this to rescue you. A woman with a mind like yours has no need of rescuing." He reached out, his fingers gently touching my cheek, a gesture of such tenderness it made my heart ache. "I did this because I cannot abide a world where a mind like yours is silenced and a heart like yours is caged. I see you. I have seen you from the very beginning, from the moment I saw you appreciating the architecture of a room you were meant to be invisible in." He took a breath, and the vulnerability I had seen once before in the ruins returned to his eyes. "My life has been a fortress, built of duty and grief. You have breached its walls without laying a single stone. You have shown me that there can be beauty in soaring arches and strength in things that reach for the sky. I am asking you to help me rebuild." He took my hands in his. "Alara Vale, will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, my partner, my duchess?" Tears I had refused to shed in front of my tormentors now fell freely, tears of shock and overwhelming joy. I could not speak, so I just nodded again and again. "Yes," I finally whispered. "Yes." A slow, true smile spread across his face, a miracle that transformed his stern features into something breathtakingly handsome. He leaned in and kissed me. It was not a kiss of fire and passion, but something far more profound. It was a kiss of recognition, of homecoming, of profound relief. It was the end of a very long, very cold winter. And so, here we were, a year later, in our drawing room, with a chasm of silence between us. "Don't speak to me," he had said. The words echoed, a cruel phantom of a past I thought I had escaped. But as I looked at him, at the genuine pain warring with anger in his eyes, I saw not the cold, unapproachable Duke, but my husband, Alaric, the man who had confessed his deepest grief to me among the ruins, the man who was haunted by the fear of failing those he loved. His reaction was not about Professor Albright's courtly gesture, it was about his brother, Leo. It was the irrational panic of his trauma, a ghost that had momentarily blinded him. The old Alara would have retreated. She would have accepted the blow, believed she deserved it, and vanished back into the shadows of her own heart. But I was not the old Alara. He had taught me not to be. I did not cry. I did not retreat. I crossed the space between us and took his rigid hand in mine. He did not pull away. "Alaric," I said, my voice soft but firm, "look at me." Reluctantly, he lifted his gaze from the floor and met my eyes. "You saw a threat," I said, holding his gaze, "and your fear is a fortress you know well. But in looking for enemies, you failed to see me. You didn't see your wife, the woman who loves you, the woman who would never ever betray that love. You are shutting me out, and we promised we would never build walls between us." The fury in his eyes crumbled, replaced by a wave of shame and self-recrimination. The granite mask dissolved, and I saw only the man I loved, lost in his own private ruin. "I saw him touch you," he whispered, his voice rough with unshed tears. And for a moment, all I could think of was Leo, and how I wasn't there, how I failed to protect him, the thought of failing you, of losing you. He couldn't finish. He pulled me into his arms, crushing me against him, burying his face in my hair. His body trembled with the force of his emotion. "Forgive me, Alara," he murmured against my skin. "I'm so sorry. I forgot for a moment. I forgot that you were the one who taught me how to truly see." I held him tightly, my heart swelling not with victory, but with a deep, abiding love. Our life together would not be a fairy tale, free of ghosts and shadows. His past and mine were a part of the architecture of our souls. But we had built our foundation on something stronger than passion or duty. We had built it on the profound, unshakable truth of being seen, truly and completely, by another, and a foundation like that could withstand any storm.